Hi, I'm Mary and I'm a beekeeper of many years, and today we're going to talk about how to install a package. There are a few things I'd like to talk about, and they are three things. Absconding. I'd also like to talk about queen acceptance, and the third thing is feeding. So first let's talk about absconding. The package of bees, here we have a package, they have had this box put on a scale, bees shaken in from different colonies, and then a queen from yet another colony stuck in here, and a can of sugar water, and now you have your package. Unlike a swarm, they've been all deciding, we're going to go do this. They prepare themselves for this journey of finding a new home. So they're very different when it comes to getting them in the box. Some of the things, what you want to do is have your equipment be very desirable. So I have my feeder can ready. It's all ready to go. We'll talk more about feeders a little bit later, but it's all ready to go. You want your hive to have sat around for a while, say a week. If there's any new paint or anything, you've put new stuff together and glue, you want all those smells to have dissipated before you put your bees in the box. You also want them to be in a, hive stand, have your hive nice and steady, have it level, certainly level this way, a little bit tilted to the front so when it rains the water can come out. You want it where while the bees are getting established, most importantly, there are not going to be disturbances like lawn mowers or leaf blowers or kids playing ball where the bees, that would interrupt the bees, because if there's too much disturbance, they could take off. Once they're established, they'll put up with that. It may make them a little more defensive, but they'll put up with it.
Frames.
The other thing is the frame. So let me open this up a minute. Inner cover. Oh, if your inner cover has a little hole notch in it, just tape that while you're introducing the package. You can take that off later. So many of you are putting your bees onto foundation. There's no drawn comb here. Black, people find it's easier to see the egg. The yellow is what used to always be. The bees are going to have to make wax from their bodies and draw out this comb, and that's very labor intensive. For releasing the queen, you want to wait until there's drawn comb before she comes out, or she's not going to have any place to start laying. If you can get some really nice drawn comb, this is very pretty, it's very clean. That's ideal. You may not be able to do that, but if you can, great. Now, if you've had a colony from last year that didn't make it, and you've got all this comb and it's all full of wax moth, it's moldy, don't use that to start a package. Yes, you can give that to an established colony, strong colony, and they will clean it up. But for a package, you want clean foundation or clean drawn comb. So then I'd also like to talk about the different queen cages.
But before you do that, I've been told before by experienced beekeepers that you can put a frame in like that and the bees will clean them up.
So experienced beekeepers, they understand a lot of the variables, so they're less likely to do something that would really end poorly, and if they do, they often have more hives that they can correct things when they go not as planned. So if they lose a queen, they have a frame of eggs they could put in, make another queen, or maybe they have another queen. So while it's all like, yeah, you can do that for putting in a package on foundation or putting in a new package, you don't want to do that. So queen cages. I have an example of queen cages here. This is the type of queen cage that will come with most packages. It's called a mini cage, California cage, and screen over here, cork in one end, and a hanger. So no attendants will be in here. So the bees are just feeding her through the screen. This is a mailing cage, and it will have queen candy in one end, a cork usually in both ends. It usually has 2 corks. And then it will have attendant bees in there, and they are feeding the queen and taking care of her while it's being mailed. With an opening, you want to make sure that that the opening is up so that the attendant bees, if they die, which they will, they're not blocking the opening and keeping the queen from getting out. In this type of cage, since there's no attendants in there, and you may end up putting some queen candy in there, which the queen doesn't eat directly, she has to be fed, then you can have that facing down and then the queen releases down. This is just another type of queen cage. It'll have queen candy in here. It's got a cap on it that you take off. So it's just another type. This is the type that will come with most packages. I want to demonstrate now, while there is no queen in the queen cage, how to get this cork in and out. So a safety pin or a paper clip is a little bit easier than a hive tool. Again, a good time not to be wearing leather gloves. You want to keep your finger, I know I'm covering, but you want to watch where the queen is. If the queen is up near where you're working, stop. Wait till she gets down to the bottom. So have your finger ready to cover that opening. Lift that cork out. It's usually a little harder than that. And get your finger, while she's down at the bottom, before she goes to the top, get your finger over that. Okay? Then when you're adding the, I saw where that went. When you're adding the candy, again, make sure she's at the bottom. Stick that on. And when you push it in, just as far as the wood. It doesn't have to go in very far. And then when it goes in the back in, it goes in this orientation. Sometimes people will think that this is a great time to treat for mites. And while it's true that there's no cat brood to have to think about, the packages are treated for mites. That doesn't mean you won't find one on them, but they're treated for mites before they're packaged. But it's just another reason for bees to want to abscond because they didn't like it. So do not treat now, do that later.
Can I mark my queen now, or can I clip her wings?
Good question. Marking the queen now, not recommended. Unless you're really good at it, you may get some paint on her wing or damage her somehow. You may think you can do it outside and she flies away. So again, you don't want the bees to reject that queen for any reason. Mark her later. Mark her after she's already established.
Clipping her wings? No?
No, don't do any messing with the queen until after she has brood and they more likely want to keep her. Remember that she's not even their queen. And when we install, we'll look at how you know when it's okay to release the queen. We'll look at that later. So I'm going to make some room to be able to knock the bees down into this box. I'm going to put the queen here. So I want frames to push against each other there. Take out one more. All right. So is there anything else I want to talk about before I install the package?
Well, you're putting the queen next to the frame that has the drawn foundation, right?
Only if you have it.
If you have it.
If you don't have it, you don't get to
Okay.
do that. If you have it, yes, put the queen right up against. So I think this frame had drawn foundation. So you would just press, go ahead, don't worry about pressing the box into here. But another good point on that is, let me take one of my not real queen cages. When you put the queen cage in, make sure that the screen is facing between 2 frames, not like facing against a frame, even if it's foundation. So you may think that there's, you may think that there's room, because you can see there's room. That will, your queen won't get fed. So make sure that it's this kind of orientation. We ready to go? I've got my package, and I like to have a lid to cover them. I guess talked about that already. And it can be challenging to get this sugar syrup can out. No gloves, it's just much easier. You need your fingernails. So use your hive tool to pry under the edge and get it started. This one is really easy. It's usually not this easy. Since there's can be a lot of bees on, if you tap it down a little bit, it gets the bees off. But otherwise, if you just kind of shake it around and pull it out, and then I just cover that up. Set it aside. We can use the sugar the sugar water that's in here later. Then the next thing to do, I'm gonna move this down, is to get the queen. She's on this tab. Again, good reason to not be wearing heavy leather gloves. If you slide her out and she drops into the cage with the rest of the bees, you have to go get her. So I'm just gonna wiggle her out. Shake some of the bees off because they're all globbed on there. Brush, stick her in here. There's the screen. I'm going to brush the bees off the screen. And I can see that they're quite gentle with her. If the bees glom back on there, especially with their rear end, and are trying to kill the queen, definitely do not release the queen. They will just kill her. If they're really calm, then you can put in a queen candy plug. Because we're on foundation, we're going to wait until there really is comb for her to lay before we release her. So we're just going to leave her like this. And I don't know if you can see her in there or not. But she's walking around. There's some sun. But see how gentle the bees are? They're generally, you don't need to worry about them. And I want to brush them off the sides a little bit because I am going to press this together. Oh, before I put it in. So this tab, you can use that as a hanger. This one. Don't bend it too much or it'll break. But if you twist it 90 degrees and bend it, then it works as a hanger on the frame. You'll see this as I put it in.
Do you want your brush or a feather?
No, I'm just using the sides of the frame
Okay.
to press it in, to rub the bees off. And then it gets below the thickness of the top of the frame. I just push the frames together, and that acts as a little hook to hold it in place. And I want those frames tight together so it doesn't fall down. Now you may hear to use a rubber band, or the reason I don't like that is you do want to go in back and look in that queen cage to make sure that she's been released or whatever. So you want to be able to access that queen cage. The other thing is I've heard some people, well, they just put the queen cage in the bottom. If it gets cold, the bees are not going to cluster at the bottom. They're going to come up. So make sure you know where your queen cage is, that you can see it there. Then we are ready to dump the bees into the box. So if you give them a slight whack, they drop to the bottom. And then I want to pour some over the queen. And then I'm just going to dump in the rest in that opening I made where I took out some frames. And I don't worry about getting them all out. This was easy. Because the rest of them you can set on this convenient platform we put here ahead of time. You can just put it up. So what I'm going to do is, these do come off. Like that. And then you can set this right up against the entrance. And then they can just walk right in. add the extra frames back in. And kind of go up and down a little bit because they're in a pile at the bottom. You don't want to squish them all. Give them a chance to move out, they'll move out.
So if you put that box inside the hive, they might not.
Yeah, if you put this,
What would happen?
if you put this box in the hive, take the other thing off, and just set it in that space, if it gets cold at night, the bees might just abandon the queen and stay clustered in the box because the box smells, they're used to that. So it's risky, so I don't recommend doing that. Any other questions about that? Even if it's raining and you're installing bees, dump them in. Don't leave them in the box. I want to make sure that these frames are tight together. As bees are in the hive, they move these apart. Hive tool is ever so useful for that. So it's about equal distance on each side. Some people like to use a thumbtack you can hang on to and stick it in each of the four corners. It holds them in place while they draw out that comb. Next piece is the inner cover. When you're putting the inner cover on, if you just up and down it a little bit like this, the bees have a chance to move out of the way. And you don't squish them. When you squish bees, it releases odors that make them more defensive. So then the other main topic is feeding. So in this setup, how it is now, we have a in-hive feeder, and it's got these tubes that the bees walk down, and this size holds about a gallon, I think, and it takes about the space of 2 frames. When I do use these, I have made a depth finder so I can look in, pull out, see how high the sugar water goes, and I can quickly see how much is in there and is not. We're not going to use this kind of feeder today. This is a top hive feeder. You wouldn't have the inner cover here, that would be off, and this would be full of sugar water, and it would go on top, and they crawl up in through here and can feed.
Do you see the bottom?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So they crawl up in through the bottom, and you can pour the sugar in here and you can add to it without really opening up the colony. You can see that they're feeding. And this new style that has these little plastic wedges here keeps the metal screen in the right place. Old style, that metal screen would go all over the place and you'd get a lot of dead bees. New style looks nice. This is another on top of the inner cover. This comes off. This has a cup. This is the bottom of it. So this goes over the inner cover. The bees can crawl through here. This is ribbed. This is ribbed. It goes on like this. This goes on. And then you can pour your sugar syrup in here, and it's easy to refill as well. Lid goes on, it keeps other things from getting in it. You do need some kind of something like another box, a deep shim to put over this, and then put the lid on top of that. And that's just a lid. What we're going to do, and why I like it, so you can see how the bees, I don't know if you can see, they're fanning and they have their little gland, Nasinoff gland, and they're telling the other bees, this is home, let's come up here. So they'll all crawl into the colony. So you like to see that. If you don't see that, not so good. Okay. Oh, that's what I did want to say. When you take your queen out of this package and the bees are all still in it, and you've got that covered up, look in there, make sure she's alive. If she is not alive, do not install the package. Cover it back up, put the sugar can back in, and talk to the person who you got your bees from. But if you put all those bees in the box and there's no queen in there, they're not likely to stay. So check the queen first, install her first, then dump the bees. The other thing I don't recommend is taking the queen out and setting her down someplace, because she can easily overheat or chill. So install her, take her out of the package, install her first. So I like this kind of feed. This is called an entrance feeder. It has other names. Normally it goes in the entrance, and you have a jar with holes in the lid, and it goes in here, the other orientation, and the bees can crawl in here and feed through that. Why I don't use it at the entrance is because it tends to attract ants. It also can attract robbing bees. This will leak if it's in the sun. The air expands and it pushes sugar water out. So just forget about entrance feeders. But it works really well to put it on top of the inner cover. We'll have another box that goes around this, which isn't here because you wouldn't be able to see what I'm doing. So if the more air there is in here, the more this is going to leak when you first turn it upside down. So just know that. That's why I put it over in these corners, because this is a little bit closer down. It's slanted a little bit down. If it leaks, it's just going to collect inside the inner cover. If I put it on this side, if the hive's like that, it's going to run down the hole. We don't want that. So I'm going to shake a little bit of this so the bees can find it. So I just dribbled it, and then stick that in. When you go to take this off, it's ever so helpful to hold that and lift it off. Certainly don't try and unscrew it. Just have your whole next jar ready with the lid with the holes in it.
So what's in that jar now?
That jar is 1-to-1 sugar to water by volume. So if you take a canning jar, I don't know that you'll be able to see this, but it's labeled cup, 2 cups, 3 cups, 4 cups, and you fill it with granulated sugar to the 2-cup level, and then pour in what was boiling water and just fill that up to the 3-cup level, dissolve it, you'll have to top it off back to the 3-cup level. That will be a 1-to-1 sugar to water ratio by volume. So very easy in the canning jar. 2 cups of granulated sugar, and then top it off with water that you've brought to a boil at the 3-cup level.
And do you let it cool down before you put it with the
Let
bees?
it cool down before you put it on the bees.
Why is it so murky?
So that's because I have a feed stimulant in here. It has things that stimulate the bees to draw comb and lay egg, the queen to lay eggs. And also it has essential oils in it that help to keep the sugar water from going bad, fungus and molds and things like that. So that's why it's murky. Thank you for that question.
Is it okay to use the feeder that comes with the package to feed the bees for a few days?
If you're using this, see how tiny these holes are? As a matter of fact, I've had people come and say there were no holes in my feeder can because they can be really tiny. That's so that it won't drip on the package when they're in transit. So if you're going to just feed right out of the can, punch those holes a little bit bigger with a nail or something. Not too big because you don't want to be super leaky, but just punch those holes a little bigger. Or just, put a hole in the other end and drain it all out into your feeder. That's what I would suggest. Yes, certainly you can use this. So now I'm going to cover this with an extra box. Now if you're using a quart jar, then you'll need a deep box. But pint jars, you can just use a medium box. So you might have more than one of those feeders in here. I know you can't see it over there, but I think that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then the lid. Just let those girls walk in. So by next day, they should all be in there. If they're not, shake them in. But they shall be in. All right. So let's talk a little bit about why you want to feed your bees, particularly packaged bees. They need that feed, the 1-to-1 or nectar, to stimulate wax production and so that they can build all this comb. So even though it's spring and they can get nectar and pollen, they need a lot. So feed them so they can dry out that comb really quickly and get the brood production going. And you'll need to check in frequently with the feed because they can go through it in a day or two. So go back in. You just have to pick up the lid, look at your feeder, say, oh, I need to add more. Have your next jar that you can just take off the old jar and put on new. Then the other question is, when do I go back in and see how they're doing? Can I go back in? So what I've heard is, well, how often can I look at my bees? Just go in and look at them. You're a new beekeeper, that's part of the experience. Don't do that with your package. Let them get established first. So you go back in after, let's say your queen is still corked, and you can go back in a few days and just make sure they were gentle like we saw here. These bees were very gentle. And then you can put in the queen candy plug. If they were this gentle, you could just put in the queen candy plug. And then you go back in 3 days and make sure that she's released. So you look in that cage, make sure she's not still in there. There'll be bees crawling around in there, but make sure she's not in there. And then you can go back in about from when you first put the bees in. In 2 weeks, you should have eggs and larvae and cap brood. For some people, eggs can be hard to see. So if you're just going in right away and looking for eggs, you might not see them. But by 2 weeks, after 2 weeks, they're established. Then you can start snooping more.
So for clarification, so if you were to check that cage and they were not being calm with her, you would leave the cork in.
Yeah, if the bees look like they're trying to kill the cage, we call, or kill the queen. Balling the queen is also what it's called. Leave her corked until they get used to her, and just go back in and check another few days.
Well, we saw a big glob of bees on there. If they're trying to kill her, will you see that same big glob of bees on there?
You may see that, but what's more the thing is when you try and wipe them away, it's very hard to do that. They'll just be right back on that screen. So it's, you try and move them, they're on. You can't really get it.
Will they be angry or will they be
Yeah, the rear
gentle?
ends. Many of them will have their rear ends towards the screen.
Okay.
Some will still be feeding her, but if they look like they're trying to sting through that screen, you don't want to release that queen.
Okay. Anything else?
Anything else? I think we're good.